I'm not hopeful, to tell you the truth, that the Russians will. So we have one letter just now that said clearly he will be removed at the point of a gun. I got my problems with that. I know the Russians well enough to know it's not that probable.
Michael,
So Ira and Alan, one of the really wacky things. I mean, I just found it hard to believe, but so intriguing. Is in this set of stories about Putin, it talked about his interest in these kind of quasi-scripted reality shows, and that the way that he had developed the communications is to kind of be the puppet master to manipulate, including opposition parties, the stories that they all told one another and sort of let it play out to his benefit. I can't even describe it, and you all probably think I'm nuts, but...
No, we've heard, I mean, that plays also into the narrative about... That plays into the narrative also of what we've heard about his mental state, right? I mean, that plays into a lot of what people have been saying in that regard.
And how much of that do you want to believe? That's the question. In other words, people say, oh, he's crazy, and that's what's really going on with him. But that's the American press and some American politicians who are making that assertion. So, I'm from Missouri. I'd like to see some proof on that.
Isn't there a history in Russia of the other leaders of the country, the deputies, if they get particularly fed up or concerned about the direction of the country and or their leader, that they will find a way to rise up and get rid of the leader?
And Ira, he, on the other hand, is likely to put them in jail, and that has happened already.
That's if he stays a step ahead of him.
Yes. So that's how dictators get to be.
Yeah.
Tom writes, Putin would demand that any peace treaty must include total immunity from any war crime charges. With the incredible loss of Ukrainian life and destruction of their country, I cannot see that being agreed to.
Well, the premise is flawed. How does Tom know? I mean, that's what he would demand. I mean,
Well, I think he's referring to the talks and the peace talks. And if those talks, because I asked the question, what would make those successful?
I see.
I think that is what we're responding to. Gene says Putin bombed hospitals and schools in Syria. He leveled countries to win it. This is Putin's pattern, so it should not be a surprise that he bombed hospitals once again. On the issue of war crimes, Jade says George W. Bush is a war criminal. He went on to become a portrait artist and pals with the Obamas. He's publicly speaking up against Russia's invasion. How ironic, ...
Well, I was going to ask about war crimes, and I could use it for my edification. I'm sure that there is a formal definition of war crimes out there, and it probably has been violated on numerous occasions in Ukraine and within the last couple of weeks. Now, did we commit a war crime when we dropped the bomb on Japan? We killed and maimed countless number of Japanese citizens. I'm just asking.
who are you asking?
I'm asking the
Public at large, right?
Miss John Cooper.
Yeah. And then what do you go on? Who enforces that, right?
Well, that's
where do you go
thing.
from there?
You're going to go to war. Oh, I'm sorry. The council has said there's a war community.
Right.
When you've reached the stage where you're in war, I'm not sure. But I'm not advocating any of this stuff. But I do wonder about it.
Let's see. We go to, actually, let's go to a break. We'll go to a break and we'll come back and we'll get to another swath of letters from our listeners. We welcome you to join them. Panel at WAMC.org, panel at WAMC.org. We'll be right back with Alan Chartock, Fran Berman, Ira Fussfeld, and Keisha Green right after this.
Support comes from Woodland Pond at New Paltz, a senior living community with many residential options, plus with concierge services, fitness center, indoor pool, and more. WoodlandPondNP.org. And from Stram Center for Integrated Medicine, Delmar, New York, offering a variety of wellness infusion therapies for energy, general health, and immunity. No medical appointments required. Feel your best. StramCenter.com.
told me once how much you care. Now I'm not really sure. You left it all bare when you closed the door. I'm lost in the changes. I'm lost in what to do. You're not giving up on me, I'm not giving up on you. Even if we have to bleed, I know that we will see this through.
Good morning, welcome back to the roundtable and to our panel discussion we're talking of course about the Russia-Ukraine war and various elements of it. We are going to your letters, panel@wamc.org. We go to Michael as the first generation Ukrainian. My heart wants America and NATO to drop the hammers of hell, but my mind tells me that unfortunately this course we are taking is probably the best action to take. Putin has been formulating this plan for 30 years and he's losing. He is dangerously unpredictable.
Yeah. Did somebody want to say something? Did one of our external people want to say something just then? I thought I heard something. Maybe not.
Well, no, I was sitting here still thinking about the last question around war crimes, and I just kept thinking about accountability and how, it's been uneven, obviously. History tells us accountability, particularly, for these kinds of offenses, have been uneven. Still, though, I grapple with this sort of, should we be hopeful, and I still err or lean on the side of, being hopeful. Otherwise, it feels like the alternative is to not have any desires or imaginations about what our future generations might experience. And so I guess I was still marinating on that, during the last segment, thinking about how we still have to hold fast, right? I hope that we, even if it takes time, we have historical, examples of it may not happen right away, obviously, but, across the globe, we've had moments where we've had to hold leaders, countries accountable for atrocities on humanity, and I'm hopeful. It's waning, but I still feel like my posture is one of hope, even in the face of such destruction. And so I guess that last letter just, makes me think, while, yes, I would like, we know how this might end quickly, and yet there are processes that hopefully, in the long run, make it so that the flow of our world might work in a more humanizing way.
It's salvageable.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So what's the basis of it? So
Keisha said earlier, which I so concur with her, it's you think about our students from the Ukraine, from the neighboring areas, like their families are there, and the communities are there, and how could you focus on anything else? And what happens to your status? I mean, it's like what happens to you now? And I mean, these are students that have just been through a couple of years of, the pandemic. I know my experience with most of the students at RPI that I had is, especially the international students, is they didn't know when they could go home, and they didn't know how things would be, and they didn't know how their families were. And now the Ukrainian students, may have gone through that as well, and now they've got a war which, ratchets things up many levels, and you just think about, kind of our responsibility as citizens of this world. And, basically, these conflicts which are so a part of, sadly, our everyday life. And, what it does to us. And, I don't know, as an educator, and, what could I even say that's helpful? I mean, other than to, you know, try to be as understanding as possible and as supportive as possible. But, you know, I'm just really challenged, and I'm challenged with this very heroic generation of students and millennials, you know, who are sort of trying to make a way in a world that's getting just increasingly crazier. And I mean, it really challenges and upsets me.
No?
So what's the basis of hope? You've heard the word hope. You know, there's got to be some factual underpinning for this hope. I'd like to know what it is. You have a dictator, in my mind, an evil dictator, Putin, who basically has no stop sign, and it's just going to go ahead here and then go ahead in other places. I want to know what the basis. When you use a word like hope, what is it founded on?
Well, there's also the flip side, right? I mean, you can say you want hope, and I understand wanting to have the concrete basis, but the flip side to it is despair and depression. You look at Putin, you look at war, you look at the unexplainable maternity center being bombed and women and children being victims, and then you look at what is happening in this country and what is happening to democracy, and then you go to look at what is happening in the climate, and and I think Fran just alluded to this of you know, what all of us, but certainly the young people are facing. So if you allow yourself to use a word that Keisha used a moment ago, to marinate in all of that, you're going to come out like a really strong tea of despair and helplessness, right? Keisha,
So what are we hoping for?
so I think we're hoping for a glimmer of hope that allows you to think that we can get out of this situation in a peaceful way, so that cooler heads will prevail, and that along the way that we also that peace talks will work, that diplomacy will ultimately work, that democracy will ultimately work. All of these things that we have in place, that environmental regulations will work. Keisha? Keisha?
Yeah. You know, I mean, it feels like two things, right? It feels like, on one hand, I want to say hope is a practice. You might have, you know, Colonel West is noted for saying this, and
Right.
other folks that it is a practice, right? It's a daily commitment to remain hopeful. So a choice, a deliberate practice that one might engage in, right? And it's hard. So that's one part, right? Which is that this is actually from all of what the present for us. And in terms of I think for our students, I think for our children, I have a 5-year-old and almost 17-month-old, and if I sort of, there has to be a way for me to articulate, to imagine that it's a leader, right? We've already experienced a leader like that in the context of our country. And so I imagine that the same will happen for them, right? There'll be someone in office that is, you know, doing horrific things. And so, but I still have to model, practice, you know, design framework of possibility. And otherwise it feels like, what would they be fighting for? And so yeah, I think, you know, as mentioned, the peace talks, I think, you know, activism, I think, you know, I find great inspiration from the Ukrainian response. And I think that kind of, you know, being in solidarity with folks on the ground, folks resisting, and in many ways that we can. And that might mean, you know, contributing to aid to Ukraine. It also might mean, as Fran mentioned, being there for our students. It also might mean wearing a t-shirt in solidarity. So there are many ways and in different contexts and spheres of influence that we might contribute to, you know, this, as King said, it's a long journey, you know, to justice and truth, and, you know, it's long. And so what I'll end with is, you know, we would need an entire show to talk about how personally, my hope is activated is from generations, right? You know, to think about